my name is Ina Hallström, and I'm a PhD student in gender studies here at Stockholm University. And my PhD project deals with endometriosis, and I wanted to focus specifically on how gender and recognition shapes the experience of endometriosis. So what I saw in my research when I interviewed people with endometriosis here in Sweden was that recognition mattered in many different ways. So it's both about how you are received when you describe your symptoms. So if you start talking about having this pain and having these troubles, but people are not taking you seriously, or you are being dismissed as this is just normal, this is what everyone has, then you are not as likely to take the next step and seek healthcare or approach a doctor to discuss this problem. So this can delay the diagnosis and also the treatment. So if others normalize it, you're not likely to seek healthcare and actually get some help. And the other aspect is that if you experience that others say that this is just normal, or you feel that you must be exaggerating or making a fuss of nothing, this can also take a toll on your own self-relation. So if people repeatedly doubt you when you describe these kinds of experiences, then you start feeling like, I must be exaggerating, it must be something wrong with me, or they start doubting themselves. So it really can take like a toll on the individual self-esteem as well. So the way that others respond when you start describing your symptoms or your pain has a grave effect on your own self-relation in several different ways. So several of the interviewees describe that since they were kids, they heard statements such as, this is normal, menstruation is painful, it hurts being a woman, or so on. And these kinds of statements were repeated so often, like again and again. So it almost resembled a mantra. And this is something that I've called a pedagogy of pain, which means that you hear something repeatedly, and it almost teaches you that you're supposed to react to the pain in a certain way. And if you don't react in this expected way, there is a risk that you are seen as like hysterical or exaggerating. And several of the interviewees describe this, that they start feeling like hysterics. They start feeling like, I must be crazy, because everyone around them said that this is the way it's supposed to be. And especially when you're a kid, like several interviewees start having the symptoms at 12 years old. So you are a child, and all the adults, doctors, and so on say that this is normal, which means that you start doubting yourself. And another aspect is that if you have these problems and you go wait for diagnosis for several years, you try to receive help, but you are dismissed. This means that it can also affect like your education, your career, maybe your desire to start a family. So it really has like a grave impact on your goals and what you want to achieve. And if you can't finish high school, for example, like a couple of interviewees said that they couldn't even finish high school, they couldn't have the final grades. This meant that they started to doubt themselves and their own abilities, like, why can't I do what everyone else can? Why can't I be like an achiever in that sense? I can't do anything. So because you wait for diagnosis, because you are not able to participate in like regular activities, you start instead to doubt yourself and your own abilities. So one of the most shaping aspects of the experience of endometriosis is the long waiting times for diagnosis. In Sweden today, the average waiting time for diagnosis is 5 to 7 years. And this is obviously a lot of time, and it's a long time that you could have been spent in another way. So if you have to wait for so long, this means that it becomes more difficult to have like plans and projects for the future and plan your future. So even to have a sense of the future, that there is a future for you. And many describe this sense of loss of the idea of the future when you can't shape your own life. Another aspect is that it was clear that the temporality of the symptoms themselves also mattered for how people around you reacted. So when the symptoms were cyclical, like appearing monthly in connection to menstruation, they were often normalized as a normal part of womanhood. But if they became chronic, like appearing daily, every day, or unexpectedly, this was instead seen as weird or strange or incomprehensible. So people would say stuff like, "How can you always be in pain? It seems like unimaginable for others." So that also matters for the way that you live time and how others treat you. If the symptoms are cyclical, they are too normal to be taken seriously. And otherwise, if they are chronic, they are too abnormal to be understood at all. The sociologist Nikki Hudson has described how endometriosis is the lost disease and characterized by an epistemology of ignorance. And this is because of the lack of knowledge, medical knowledge about endometriosis. So despite being as common as diseases like asthma and diabetes, it has received much less funding. So that's one of the aspects that influences how we see endometriosis today. Because of the lack of knowledge, it's not perceived as common. People don't know what it is. And that's one important aspect. Another one is menstrual stigma, which is still widespread. And this means that people can be reluctant to talk about menstruation and discuss it with friends and family. And if you don't talk about the symptoms, it's much more difficult to know, is this normal or is this something that everyone has? It's like impossible to know if you should do something about it or if you should just stay the way you are and try to endure. This normalization is very much linked to a stigma and a silence. You can't compare yourself to others if you don't know what others are going through. Of course, I think that there should be a lot more medical knowledge, and this means funding. It needs to be funded so that it becomes more well known. Like some of my interviewees, they said that not even the doctors had heard of the diagnosis. And it's better today than it was like 10 years ago. Many of them say that it has improved a lot, and you see like discussions of endometriosis in media and so on. So that makes it much easier to know that there is an illness that's connected to menstruation and it's not normal. So I think that information in society directed at adolescents and young kids needs to be improved so that people know that there is a specific illness, menstruation and severe pain. It's not normal. You can have some pain, but it shouldn't like obstruct you in your daily life. So one part is like knowledge in general and information. And the other part is about like norms and how we treat women's pain in general, because there are a lot of associations connected to women's pain that it's often seen as psychological. This is something my interviewees describe. They say like, it's psychological. It's always psychological to them when doctors say that this can't be as bad as you describe it. So the view on women's pain and women's illnesses in general as being exaggerated or something that you shouldn't take seriously, that also needs to change.